Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your leadership. To Mr. Onubogu, what do you see as the primary drivers of religious freedom violations in Nigeria? And secondly, what are the political, economic, social, and historical factors that exacerbate the situation?
Thank you, Congressman. I really think it's a mix of factors here that we're looking at. A mix of factors here. And as I mentioned in my testimony, at a core of this are failures of governance. There needs to be an opportunity to address the governance deficits that we see across the board in Nigeria at every level. And I think sometimes when we look at this issue, it's also important because we haven't been able to take a look at it from a whole of government, from a holistic point of view. It's important for us to understand what are the areas that really encompass more institutional weaknesses, and then what are the areas that are plainly just a lack of political will. And so I think, again, as I had mentioned earlier in my earlier response, there is an opportunity here to actually begin to identify what are the areas, what are the institutional weaknesses that exist within the Nigerian system that allow or enable the environment for the violation of religious freedoms. And then what are the instances where it's just plain old lack of political will. Once we're able to do that, then you'll be able to identify a proper solution to a problem. Right now, we haven't been able to identify a proper solution. And this is why these conflicts are protracted and they've continued time and time again.
Well, thank you so much. It's also very peculiar. I'd like for it to be noted in the record as we look forward to the great works of the continent and Africa as it marches and rises towards 2050, where 25% of the world's population will be of African descent. And this country, the United States, seems to talk down to African people. Historically, I would say that the United States is a very generous nation, and in some ways the most generous nation, but has the most peculiar cruelty towards the African continent, and it must be confronted about its legacy. The second thing is we are right now in a hostile environment with the Republic of South Africa and Nigeria, the nation's two most populous countries, if you will, or certainly two most prosperous countries that should be dealt with. I have another question for you. Based on your experience, which types of U.S. government programs or initiatives have been past or present, have been most effective in promoting religious freedom and interfaith dialogue in Nigeria?
Thank you very much for that question. And for several years, I actually worked specifically in the Middle Belt on these types of community security initiatives. And we've seen local level peace building initiatives where communities have been able to, and most importantly, as a community led by the communities, they've been able to put in place early warning systems, and beyond those early warning systems, moving a step further to ensure early response. Because, as has already been pointed out, it's of no use if people are able to raise an alarm and no response comes through. So over the years, we've seen some successful low-level peace-building programs across the Middle Belt, community-led peace-building programs. We've also seen programs that have included religious leaders from both faiths, particularly in places like Kaduna, in Adamawa, in Benue, in Plateau State. We've seen interfaith mediation councils where Muslims and Christian leaders have been able to come together to work closely with their communities. Those types of initiatives we've seen have been very successful.
Last question I would have for you. In its effort to dismantle the USAID program, the Trump administration terminated a USAID program called Partner that supported peace-building efforts to northern and north-central Nigeria. The $2 million project helped to strengthen the country's early warning and security response systems and provide training for local leaders, including religious leaders, on conflict mitigation strategies. This project, amongst others, like it helped to provide local leaders with mechanisms to alert law enforcement to possible conflicts before it happens. partner also helped facilitate communications between farmer and herder, community leaders, often individuals from different religious backgrounds, in an attempt to bridge the gap between the two groups. Ms. Arungbu, what are some of these early warning signs of conflict? How would you describe the drivers of conflict in northern and central Nigeria? And to what extent do you assess these stem from religious and climate and resource competition?
As I said, the mix of these drivers, it's a mix, and they're complex. And that's why I say, as you look at violence or as you look at a specific conflict, it's important to understand that there might be some conflicts, or there are conflicts that are specifically driven by religion. And there are some other conflicts that may have specific drivers. Where the challenge is now, or where the problem is when everything is lumped in together. You know, working for several years in the Middle Belt, when a conflict breaks out and people say, oh, it's a farmer-herder conflict, it's a farmer-herder conflict. Now, every type of conflict in the Middle Belt becomes a farmer-herder conflict. But we need to take the time and take the step to actually identify which of these conflicts are driven specifically because of disputes between farmers and herders, and then which of these conflicts are just plain old criminality, as some of them are, and then which of those conflicts are actually driven because people might be targeted because of their faith. And I think this is where we miss the point when we do not acknowledge the complexities within Nigeria, when we use a single story to define the conflict. This is why we've not been able to find viable solutions. If we go back, and I believe, Ms. Shen, in the previous panel, we spoke about the Chibok girls. This was an incident that happened in 2014. And just a week ago, we saw another group of school children kidnapped from their schools. Since 2014 till today, we've seen 6 different incidents of kidnapping. And we've had discussions on each and every one of them. But we've not been able to identify a viable solution because we tend to oversimplify and we tend to generalize what the problems are. But for every conflict that happens in Nigeria, there are specific drivers, and we have to be able to take the time to identify what the root cause is of each specific conflict for us to be able to develop a sustainable solution.
And thank you so much for your testimony. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.